Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the world of Korean conglomerates. You know, those massive family-run businesses,
The chaebols.
the Chivols, right? And we're going to zero in on this proposed law that could really shake things up for one of the biggest players.
Yeah.
Samsung, you ready to unpack this?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating story full of twists and turns. This Samsung Life Act, a bill recently reintroduced in the Korean National Assembly, sounds pretty dry on the surface, but trust me, this is anything but boring. It gets to the heart of power, family legacies, and maybe even a fight for the soul of Korean capitalism.
Okay, so first things first, for those of us who don't spend our days, poring over Korean financial news, what exactly is this Samsung Life Act, and why should we care?
Well, the bill focuses on how insurance companies value the stocks they own in other companies, especially those within the same corporate family, those affiliates. Right now, they use the original purchase price, which in Samsung Life's case takes us all the way back to the 1980s. Think about that for a second. Imagine if your entire stock portfolio was valued based on what you paid decades ago. It wouldn't quite reflect the current reality.
Yeah, that's like valuing my vintage vinyl collection based on what I paid for it at a garage sale in high school.
Yeah.
Definitely not a true reflection of its worth today. So how does Samsung fit into this whole stock valuation puzzle?
Here's where it gets interesting. Samsung Life owns a huge chunk of Samsung Electronics, and we're not talking about some obscure subsidiary. This is Samsung Electronics, the global tech giant maker of those phones, TVs, and gadgets you probably use every single day.
Okay, so we're talking about a lot of stock, and this law, if it passes, could force Samsung Life to sell off a big chunk of those incredibly valuable holdings.
You got it. And that's why this is more than just an accounting quirk. It gets to the very structure of these massive K-balls.
So what's the driving force behind this proposed change? What's the big principle at play here?
It boils down to the idea of separation of financial and industrial capital, which might sound a bit jargony, but it's a pretty simple concept. It basically means you don't want financial institutions like insurance companies having too much control over industrial companies like Samsung Life having a huge influence over Samsung Electronics.
So to put it another way, it's like saying you wouldn't want your bank also owning the car factory, the grocery store, and the airline you fly on. That much power concentrated in one place could create some problems.
Exactly. Think back to the 2008 financial crisis. Part of what made that situation so catastrophic was the interconnectedness of financial institutions. If one domino falls, they all fall. This principle of separating financial and industrial capital aims to prevent that kind of domino effect and promote a healthier, more competitive market.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, this law is trying to clip the wings of these cables a bit, make them less interconnected and hopefully more transparent in their dealings.
You could say that the proposed law sets a very specific limit. Financial companies like Samsung Life can't own more than 10% of a non-financial company. And here's the kicker. Samsung Life, along with Samsung Fire and Marine Insurance, are right at that 10% threshold with their combined ownership of Samsung Electronics.
Wait a minute, combined. So even different branches of the K-ball are being lumped together under this proposed law.
That's right. And it's not just a coincidence. The Financial Industry Restructuring Act specifically states that when evaluating these financial affiliates, you have to consider their combined stake. They can't just shuffle things around between different parts of the family to sidestep the rules.
Okay, so we've got this 10% ownership limit, a mountain of Samsung stock, and a law that could force a massive sell-off. What else am I missing? What other pieces of the puzzle are at play here?
Well, remember those stock buybacks we talked about? Samsung Electronics has been buying back its own shares. Normally, that's just a way to return value to shareholders. But in this case, it creates a ticking time bomb for Samsung Life.
I see where you're going with this. Because when a company buys back shares, it reduces the total number of shares out there, which effectively increases the percentage of ownership for anyone holding onto their stock. So Samsung Life's ownership percentage keeps creeping up even if they aren't buying any new shares.
Precisely. It's basic math, but it could have huge consequences for Samsung. As Samsung Electronics continues these buybacks, it could push Samsung Life and Fire and Marine's combined ownership over that crucial 10% line, putting them in direct violation of the proposed law.
It's like a high-stakes game of chess with each side trying to anticipate the other's moves and stay one step ahead.
Exactly. And there's another layer to this puzzle that we need to consider: the inheritance tax situation.
Right. I read something about the family behind Samsung having to pay a colossal inheritance tax bill, something in the billions, right?
Billions with a B. So you can bet they're exploring every avenue to generate the cash they need to settle this massive tax burden.
So would selling off some of that Samsung Electronics stock help them foot the bill for this inheritance tax?
Potentially, yes. But remember, it's all about balance. They need to pay those taxes, but they also want to maintain their grip on the company that control is a huge part of their legacy. And of course, they need to keep investors happy too.
Right, because unhappy investors could lead to a drop in stock prices, which would only make their financial situation even more precarious. So how are they trying to keep those investors on board while navigating this legal and financial minefield?
Well, Samsung Fire and Marine Insurance recently announced that they'll be raising their shareholder return rate to 50% by 2028, a pretty dramatic increase. Many see this as a direct response to the inheritance tax situation and the looming threat of the Samsung Life Act.
So are they trying to sweeten the deal for investors by giving them a bigger piece of the pie, hoping to offset any potential losses they might face if Samsung Life is forced to sell off its electronic stock?
It's certainly a possibility. This whole situation offers a fascinating glimpse into the intricate world of corporate finance and how these family dynasties try to maintain control amidst changing regulations and financial pressures.
And it's important to remember that this isn't just a Samsung story, right? If this law passes, it could have ripple effects across all the Korean chaebols, these powerful conglomerates that dominate so much of the Korean economy.
That's what I find so fascinating about this situation, that we're potentially talking about reshaping the entire landscape of corporate power in Korea. Will this lead to greater transparency and a more level playing field as the proponents of the law hope? Or will the chaebols find a way to adapt and maintain their grip on the Korean economy?
It really feels like we're witnessing a pivotal moment in Korean corporate history. This Samsung Life Act could have a domino effect on all those chaebols, those family-controlled giants that have shaped the Korean economy for decades.
You're absolutely right. This case highlights a fundamental question. How much power should these massive conglomerates wield in a modern economy? Are they engines of growth and innovation, or do they stifle competition and concentrate too much power in the hands of a few?
So let's talk about these chaebols for a second. For those of us who might not be familiar with the, intricacies of the Korean economy, can you give us a quick rundown on what they are and why they're so important?
Sure. Think of the biggest names in Korea. Samsung, Hyundai, LG. These are all chaebols. They're these massive family-controlled groups that have their fingers in almost every sector of the Korean economy, from electronics and shipbuilding to construction and even insurance.
They're like sprawling empires touching almost every aspect of Korean life.
Yeah.
And that kind of influence, that concentration of power has to raise some eyebrows, right?
You're hitting on a key point. Critics argue that the cables have become too big, too influential. They worry that these groups stifle competition and innovation, potentially holding back the economy as a whole. There have been instances of corruption, unfair business practices, and even allegations of undue influence over government policy.
So this Samsung Life Act is being seen as a way to potentially rein them in, to level the playing field a bit, and promote greater transparency.
That's a great way to put it. This idea of separating financial and industrial capital is a key principle in many developed economies. It's all about preventing financial institutions from using their power to unfairly benefit affiliated companies, especially at the expense of smaller competitors.
So in essence, this proposed law is saying, hey, Samsung Life, you're an insurance company, so stick to insurance.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be pulling the strings at Samsung Electronics.
Hmm?
It's about establishing clearer boundaries and ensuring a more balanced distribution of power within these sprawling corporate structures, right?
Exactly. Remember, it's not just about Samsung. The outcome of this act could have a ripple effect on all the chaebols, potentially changing the very fabric of the Korean economy.
Now, I imagine the Samsung family and their allies aren't exactly thrilled about this proposed law. They've built this empire over generations, and I doubt they'll give up control easily.
You're right. There's a lot of pushback against this kind of reform, both from the chaebols themselves and from those who argue that they are vital to Korea's economic success.
So what are the main arguments against the Samsung Life Act? What are the potential downsides that people are worried about?
One of the biggest concerns is that forcing Samsung Life to sell off its Samsung Electronics shares would flood the market with stock, potentially driving down the price and hurting investors.
That's a valid concern. No one wants to see a fire sale that devalues a major company and wipes out people's savings.
Right. And others argue that this kind of regulation would make Korean companies less competitive on the global stage. They say it would tie their hands and prevent them from making the kind of strategic investments that could benefit the entire chaebol group.
So it's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? trying to promote fairness and transparency without undermining the competitiveness of Korean businesses in the global market. It's about finding that sweet spot where regulation encourages healthy growth without stifling innovation.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the political dimension to all of this. The chaebols wield enormous influence in Korea. They lobby politicians, contribute to campaigns, and have a significant impact on public opinion.
So even if this law is well-intentioned and makes sense from an economic standpoint, getting it passed and actually implemented is going to be a major uphill battle. We're talking about going up against some of those powerful entities in Korea.
Absolutely. This is a high-stakes game, a power struggle with the future of the Korean economy hanging in the balance. There are a lot of powerful interests at play, and it's going to be fascinating to see how this all unfolds.
So what are you watching for? What are the key indicators that will tell us which way this is heading?
Well, first and foremost, will the bill actually get passed by the National Assembly? That in itself is a major hurdle.
You're right. Even if it's introduced, it could get stalled in committee, watered down with amendments, or simply voted down altogether. There are a lot of ways for this to get derailed before it even becomes law.
And even if it does pass, how will Samsung respond? Will they comply gracefully and restructure their holdings, or will they try to challenge the law in court? Will they find creative loopholes to get around it? Their response will tell us a lot about how this will play out.
It really is like a game of chess, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other. And it's not just a game for the elite. This has real implications for the average Korean citizen, doesn't it?
Of course. We're talking about the future of the Korean economy. Does this reform lead to greater competition and innovation, as its proponents hope? Does it create more opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses? Or does it create instability and hurt investor confidence, potentially leading to job losses and economic hardship?
And we haven't even touched on the potential global implications of all this.
Oh, that's a whole other layer of complexity. Remember, Samsung isn't just a Korean company. It's a global behemoth, deeply embedded in the global supply chain.
You're right. Their products are everywhere, and their operations span continents. So whatever happens in Korea could send shockwaves throughout the global economy.
Think about the potential impact on the smartphone market, the semiconductor industry, even the geopolitical landscape. If Samsung Electronics has to go through a major restructuring, the effects could be felt worldwide.
This truly is a global story with potentially huge implications. And the thing, it all hinges on this seemingly technical piece of legislation about insurance company holdings. It's a perfect example of how seemingly small changes can have massive ripple effects.
It just goes to show that even the most arcane-sounding laws can have a dramatic impact on our lives. It's all connected, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. You never know what you're going to uncover when you start peeling back the layers.
Absolutely. That's what we love about diving deep into these complex topics. It's all about connecting the dots, seeing the patterns, and understanding the forces that shape our world. But before we get too carried away with global supply chains and the future of technology, why don't we shift gears for a moment and explore another intriguing aspect of this whole saga, the potential impact on corporate governance and shareholder activism. It's amazing how this deep dive into the Samsung Life Act has opened up all these other bigger issues. Talked about corporate power, family legacies, and even that delicate balance, between national economic interests and global market forces. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. You start with this seemingly simple legal issue and end up uncovering a whole web of interconnected complexities.
It's a perfect example of how, seemingly technical changes in laws and regulations can signal these much larger shifts in power dynamics, wealth distribution, and the way our world is organized. And it's not just happening in Korea. We're seeing similar debates play out all over the world, from the U.S. to Europe to China.
Exactly. And, even if you're not planning on investing in Korean stocks anytime soon, this story still matters to you. Yeah. It raises questions about the role of these massive corporations, these titans of industry, in a rapidly changing world. Consumers have more power than ever before. Governments are increasingly scrutinizing monopolies, and the whole idea of what a company is and its responsibilities to society is being redefined.
It's like we're at a crossroads. On one hand, these cables have played a huge role in Korea's economic rise. They've created jobs, built industries, and put Korean products on the map. But the question is, can that model of concentrated power and family control adapt to the demands of the 21st century? Can it keep pace with the growing calls for greater transparency, accountability, and social responsibility?
It feels like there's this global tug-of-war happening right now. On one side, you have the drive for economic growth and innovation, often led by these massive corporations.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you have growing concerns about inequality, corporate influence over government, and the potential stifling of competition. Finding the right balance between these competing forces is a major challenge, not just for Korea, but for all of us.
Absolutely. And the stakes are incredibly high. If these giant companies falter, the effects can cascade throughout the economy, disruptions to supply chains, job losses, and even geopolitical shifts as countries scramble for economic and technological dominance. It's a complex web of interconnected systems, and understanding these dynamics is crucial for navigating the challenges of the 21st century.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Samsung Life Act and its potential ripple effects, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think it's this: pay close attention to those seemingly small technical changes in laws and regulations. Often those are the early warning signs, the canaries in the coal mine signaling much larger shifts in power wealth and the very structure of our world. Don't underestimate the power of seemingly mundane legal battles to reshape the landscape of our lives.
It's a reminder that even a deep dive into insurance law can be absolutely fascinating when you understand the bigger picture, the underlying forces at play, and the potential consequences for all of us. Who knew corporate finance could be this captivating?
Exactly. And that's what the deep dive is all about, helping you connect the dots, see the patterns, and understand the complex forces that shape our world, all in an engaging and insightful way.
So keep your eye on the Samsung Life Act and what it reveals about the future of Korean capitalism, the global balance of power, and the evolving role of corporations in the 21st century. Remember, even if you're not directly invested in Samsung or Korean stocks, these kinds of stories offer valuable insights into the global forces that affect us all.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about Samsung or even Korea. It's about the kind of world we want to live in, the balance of power we want to see, and the role we want these powerful companies to play in shaping our collective future.
We'll definitely be keeping a close eye on this story, and we hope you will too. And if you want to dive even deeper into the world of chaebol's corporate governance and the global implications of this power struggle, we've got some fantastic resources linked in the show notes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.